Io vedo che ci sono già i prossimi ospiti in attesa. Adesso abbiamo un momento molto interessante perché abbiamo un'intervista con Roger Linn. Roger Linn è l'inventore praticamente della drum machine programmabile a campioni, ma è anche un chitarrista, tra le altre cose molto molto bravo. E in questa intervista lo intervisterà, scusate il gioco di parole, Robin Vincent. Io li faccio entrare. Hi Roger.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi Robin. Ok,
How you
ci
doing?
siamo.
Hello, guys.
Oh, someone's audio. Robin, I think your audio is breaking up.
Is it?
Do you
no,
hear
not
us?
now. I just heard some funny noises, but now.
Oh, it could be anything. Could be anything. Just gremlins in the system.
Lo toglierà.
There is a little noise.
Everything's fine now. I can hear.
È leggermente basso il volume di Roger.
Roger, we hear you a little low for your volume.
Oh, really? Well, let's see. I'm
Yeah.
turning this thing up. Do you hear me any better now?
No, it's slightly changed. You have to raise up the volume if possible.
Do you hear a tapping?
Yes.
Yeah, but
Yes.
it's really low.
Do you hear? I'm just wondering if this mic is on or if that mic is on or something. So do you hear?
No, ok, va bene così.
Does that
Okay,
sound
if we
like
can
this mic
do
is on?
any better, it's fine. Like this. If there is nothing more that we can do,
Well, for example, is this louder?
maybe
No,
go
it's
near. So, okay, I see you. Okay. There we are.
Okay. Well, I'll try to talk louder then, I guess.
Yeah. It's just your relaxed sort of Californian drawl. That's all it is. It's the laid backness.
It took me years to perfect this. So. Anyway,
Okay.
thank you very much for including me in your interview. I listened to part of the previous segment. I didn't understand anything, but it sounded wonderful because the Italian language is so beautiful.
Yeah, I agree.
and it's fun for me because Italy has such a rich musical history, and I think I told Robin this, that in 1967, as a young boy of 12 years old, I lived in Rome, on the west side of Rome, and I really enjoyed it. I would go out by myself on the buses exploring every day, and it was a marvelous city to be in.
So you went in our country when you were a kid.
Yes, at 12 years old, I lived in Rome for 3 months.
Oh, for 3 months. And why for such a time? You were on vacation or for other purposes?
My family was traveling in Europe for a year because my father was a professor of music at the University of Southern California. And so he did what's called a sabbatical leave of absence, where the professor takes 1 year off to explore and get paid half the money. And during that time, he wrote some compositions. But it was wonderful. Most of the time, we lived in a camper. But in the winter, it was too cold, so we rented an apartment in Rome from a friend of my father's.
That's a very good story to hear about. And what you like the most about Italy and even for Rome, since you went there?
Well, it's beautiful. Obviously it's a beautiful city, and I love the architecture. And at the time, Italy had just built this region south of Rome called the EUR, and it had some beautiful buildings, including one that was called the Square Colosseum. And I always loved architecture, even as a child. So I would go out exploring. I would go to the real Colosseum, which at the time had cats everywhere. Everywhere in the city there were cats.
Cats are an important part of Rome since they are everywhere and especially in the part of the Colosseum. Yeah.
I can make
Cats.
a wonderful impersonation of a cat. Here goes.
Ok.
Cat noises everywhere for the Roman Empire.
Bene, io
Roger, we would like to have you to tell us something about you, what you can tell us. You can
Sure.
explain something to us.
Well, sure. I'm mostly known for making drum machines. I design electronic music instruments, and
Lindrum,
I'm mostly known.
if I'm not,
Oh,
you created Lindrum, right?
I created the Lindrum. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, in 1980, I had my first drum machine, which was the first drum machine with sampled sounds, and it was called the Lm1 Drum Computer. This was the drum machine that was used on all the recordings by Prince and many by Michael Jackson, Madonna, and many of the English bands at the time. And it was mostly known because it had sampled sounds for the first time. But it was also known because I had created a new system of real-time programming. So I created timing correction and swing, which were very useful in the creation of beats. It allowed you to create a beat in real time. And so that was popular. And then there was one called the Lindrum. There was one called the Linn 9000. Uh, and then I was a horrible businessman. So my company went out of business. And after that, I worked with the Akai company, and I designed the MPC line of drum machines, the MPC 60, the MPC 3000, and these were very popular in dance music, in particular in hip hop and other urban styles of music. And
Well, they're
then,
still popular nowadays, I can
yes,
say.
they are still popular, yes.
Can
And
I
then,
ask, Roger?
oh, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to interject about Akai. The S series of samplers that already existed when you started, or was that part of the development of the MPC?
It had already existed. They had already had a sampler called the S900,
Ah,
and it was a 12-bit sampler. And a little bit of trivia, one of your countrymen, Robin, a fellow named David Cockerell, designed the sound chip for the S900, and he also designed the sound chip that was used in the MPC 60. And David Cockerell also was the designer of a synth called the EMS Synthy.
oh right, yes, of course.
So
That is
he's
going back.
in among electronic nerds. David Cockerell is very famous.
Yeah, no, undoubtedly.
The EMS Synthy was a synthesizer that had all its knobs, and on the top it had all the patch cords. So the patch cords would always hang down over the knobs.
Oh, we're still fighting with patch cords now. No one's quite come up with a solution for that because we actually quite enjoy the physicality of that somehow. There's something about exploring a pitch physically, a patch physically by having to push the cables away that we quite like.
Well, I think actually there's in the science of genetics, at some point the scientists will find out there's a gene, the hardware gene. If it's switched on, people only like knobs and hardware synthesizers. If it's switched off, then they're perfectly comfortable with rolling a little picture of a knob on a screen. And they're different worlds, and they will never mix.
I know. I mean, would you consider yourself a digital person?
I actually don't care about if I try to make music, which I don't so much anymore. I'm perfectly content to use software. And to me,
Right.
the only reason for hardware is a better human interface, which is,
Yes.
for example, what I've done with my Linnstrument here. But as far as sounds, I when I was a teenager in the 70s, I used to use modular synthesizers, and I discovered something. After you make this wonderful patch, you can't save it as a preset.
No.
So I've been there, done that, but now I prefer software.
Oh, that's interesting because I mean, a lot of us are discovering it for the first time, I suppose, and in the way that this has gone in a very cyclic, in a waveform. In fact, you could say history keeps repeating itself, but hopefully in more and better forward-thinking ways. I would like to think.
Well, I just think that if you've got the hardware gene turned on, you want to turn a knob. And, and ultimately, once all the features become stable, and people don't have to think about these technical things anymore, and they can just focus on music at some point in the future, then it makes more sense, I think, to have dedicated musical instruments. In the same way that all the beautiful dedicated musical instruments, acoustic instruments that came out of, for example, Italy, have made such beautiful music.
Mm.
But now, a person has to have one foot in the musical world and one foot in the engineering world in order to play music. Um, Maybe
Yeah,
it's good, maybe it's bad.
yeah. I mean that can be true. I think there's. I mean, certainly for a long while, we've also had to be IT experts. We've had to provide our own IT support. We've had to be able to cope with technology in order to access music. Often, that
Well,
becomes a
for
barrier.
example, this conference, SOUNDMIT, a very good conference, it has, it seems to be that all the conference titles are about technical issues. I didn't
Mm.
see any conference titles about melody, harmony, arrangement, um, uh, mix. Now that would be technical, but nothing about the topics of music. That's not bad, but it's common
Mm.
for music conferences to have no topics about music, and I think that's kind of funny.
That is interesting. I mean, one thing I think that I've seen in recent times, where with modular synthesis, perhaps more than anything else, is that the patching of something, the going through a patch, becomes part of a creative process as opposed to an engineering process. And so often, when you see a performance of a modular artist, then that connection, making those connections as part of the performance, can be very illuminating, very enlightening for people watching, and becomes part of the performance as opposed to part of the setup, if that makes sense.
Oh, it certainly does. I just think it's kind of funny um, that musicians will talk to musicians, and if they talk about a new product, for example, let's say a musician came into the workshop of Mr. Stradivarius, and he said,
Mhm.
"What lacquers are you using? What woods are you forming? And what are the specifications of the wood? And
Mm.
what is your vibratory frequency of your wood?" No, they would usually pick up the violin and play something. And now, if I exhibit at a trade show, people will say things like, "That sound, how many oscillators? What is the filter slope of that filter? How many envelope generators are in that sound?" And I say, "Would you like to play it?" And then their face turns white as a ghost, and then they put their finger on the surface of the instrument like they're finger painting. But it's a different time. You have to learn these technical details in order to play music. But my guess is that many musicians are dragged kicking and screaming into the
Mm.
technical world.
Yeah, no, I mean, it becomes inevitable unless you have a support team around you that can, that provide all the technical expertise. I mean, I think there probably are still artists who are unable to do that, who are able to focus purely on their art while they have a team of people engineering all the stuff behind it. But for so many of us, we're having to wear all these hats all at once every time. So you got to the MPC on your little journey. So what happened to bring us from there to where we are now?
Well, I did a number of things, but I'm sort of speaking of the highlights.
Yeah.
After that, in the early 2000s, I created a series of guitar processors called Adrenaline. And what
Mm.
this was is in the 70s, when I was a teenager, and I used to work with modular synthesizers, one of the things I liked as a guitar player was using sequences and driving filter frequencies to be able to create rhythmic sequences of filter tones. And so I decided this is something that's very confusing, and a lot of guitar players don't understand it, but they could benefit from it. So I decided to make this pedal that had all the elements of a modular synthesizer inside,
Mm.
and you would just select a preset and then play a chord. And in listening to the drum machine, the chord would be processed through all these rhythmic filtering transformations. And that was the purpose of Adrenaline. And so I made 3 different models of that. And then I turned my attention back to drum machines and made a drum machine with my friend of many years, Dave Smith,
Yes.
and it was called the Tempest. And so the idea was that Dave was Mr. Analog Synthesizer, Roger was Mr. Drum Machine, so we made an analog drum machine. And it was a lot of fun to work with Dave, and Tempest has really influenced a lot of music. And then after that, um, I noticed something in music, that the electronic music was becoming background music, background for singers, background for dance, background for picture. And I missed when music used to be the foreground. People like Miles Davis, or as a guitar player, my idols, Eric Clapton or Jimi Hendrix. And these people were the foreground. They were the center of attention, and I don't see that anymore. So I thought, why is that? And it all of a sudden occurred to me that people are playing music with on-off switches. And
Mm.
that's what a MIDI keyboard is. It's a bunch of on-off switches. Yes, you have a little sideways knob to pitch bend, another sideways knob to add a mathematically perfect vibrato, but you can't do the sorts of gestures, bending on a guitar or the vibrato on a violin or the subtle breath control of a saxophone, for example. And so I decided to make this thing called Linnstrument.
Mm.
And what this does is it's an expressive controller, and it responds to three dimensions: to your pressure, to pitch, and to the y-axis for timbre. Some people may recognize that melody.
Oh yeah,
Some
give us a
Italians.
let us know in the chat if you recognize that melody. That's always a good one. So would you, do you think is it virtuosity that's missing these days?
Well, the closer that a musical instrument can become to the human voice, the more it draws people's attention. So right now,
Mm.
since we're all playing music with on-off switches from a MIDI keyboard or a drum machine effectively, uh, it makes for a very compelling background parts, but it doesn't draw your attention the way the human voice does. But someone playing with great skill a solo violin or a saxophone solo, that draws your attention. And what that takes is all those subtle variations under skilled hands of the loudness of the note, the pitch of the note, the timbre of the note. And when you do have those skilled hands, people call you an instrumental virtuoso. And that's what's missing. And it's not because there's no talent there. It's because the human interface to sound is very limited, on-off switches. So
Mm.
what I've done here is take away the on-off switches and instead allow the surface of the instrument to capture your very subtle finger movements to be able to get you much closer to a violin or a guitar or a saxophone or to the expression of a human voice.
Mm. No, that's interesting. I mean, I've often thought, because I come from, or have been through, a large computer background. So for, say, 20 years, I've been very much about software, very much in the box. But the thing that I came to realize is that all of my creativity, every ounce of everything I was trying to create, was being focused through a mouse, through a single point. And I came to a revelation, I suppose, that that's ridiculous. How can I restrict myself to such a degree that everything is going through a single fine point? And that just seems nuts. And so at that point, I started falling out of the box and onto hardware and onto knobs and bits and pieces. And that's a continuing evolution, So I think it's true. I think the on-off element that you talk about, that paradigm we have of just these on-off switches, is another level of restriction that we've applied to ourselves, and we've adopted it very easily. It's the thing we're told we should learn when we're children, and so to break out of that is difficult.
I think it is completely normal, and that the machines, that we're playing the music that the machines want us to play.
Yeah.
We say that must be all that exists.
Mm.
I guess all that I can do is to play music with on-off switches. So people don't think that there's something more. I think it's particularly funny that people are playing music on these electronic piano keyboards, because first they're on-off switches. But also, the only reason that those keys are in a long line is that a few centuries ago, you needed to have a string behind each key.
Yes.
There's no strings behind electronic keyboards, but people are still playing the same thing they've been playing for a few centuries. But there are
Mm.
many problems with the electronic piano keyboard, and that's what I've tried to address in Linnstrument.
Yeah, so tell us about the layout of the Linnstrument, because you are using some kind of grid system, some kind of overlay. I mean, it has a vibe of a piano fretboard about it. Not a piano fretboard, a guitar fretboard is what I meant to say.
That's correct. Yeah, I'll get a sound of a guitar sound, so it's a little more intuitive looking at it. Now, of course, you're looking from the other side of it, but what it has 8 rows with 25 different little, they look like drum pads if you look at it up close. They're little,
Yeah.
they're 19 millimeter square pads, and each one of these rows is like a string. You probably
Yes.
can't hear that very well, can you?
No, we can. Well, at least I can. Somebody said I was too loud in the chat. Is my level slightly better now? Just let us know. That would be helpful. Thank you. Sorry, Roger, continue.
Quiet.
Yes, maybe everyone's
But at
turned it
any
up
rate,
and then I'm too loud.
So each one of these rows is like a string, and each one of the consecutive pads is like the frets on a string.
Mm-hmm.
But you can slide between the notes. And the other thing is, these lights on there, they tell you where the white keys are, where the natural notes are. So if I want to play, for example, on this row, the C note is in blue, and then next is D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And then the different strings, the different rows are just like different strings. You can tune them however you wish. But the standard tuning that most instrumentalists, and there are almost 2,600 instrument players out there now, is tuned in all fourths. But you could tune them like a guitar. You could tune them in fifths like a cello or violin.
So fourths, you mean it's offset by a fourth, like the bottom end of a guitar? Is that
exactly
how?
That's right.
Right.
Or a bass guitar. But you can tune them however you want. There's a setting here called row offset, and that will allow you to tune the strings however you want, open tunings or whatever you like.
So what is the advantage over the piano?
I'm sorry?
What is the advantage over the piano when it comes to playing?
Well, the advantage is that because the interval is the same between each of the note pads, if I want to bend from a C to a D, I just play a C and then slide to a D. If I want to slide from a D to an F, and then I vibrato. It's much more intuitive than holding a little pitch bend wheel up. Or even if I were to have arranged the notes, for example, on my good friends, the Rowley Company, on their C-board, it's a wonderful instrument, but the trouble is the intervals between pitches are not uniform. So you never end up developing any pitch gesture because they're always limited to one key, because the piano keyboard itself, you need a different fingering for a given chord for each of the 12 keys. Whereas Linnstrument is purely isomorphic. Here's a C major, C sharp major, D major, D sharp major, E major, F major. So it makes it much more intuitive. It's a new human interface for the 21st century. And by the way, it's not only on Linnstrument, it's also on Rowley's blocks, the light plaid block. It's also in Ableton Push, the same tuning layout. It's also in the GeoShred app, and it's in a number of other hardware and software instruments. So it's a growing new standard as opposed to the piano keyboard, which is only the way it is because a few centuries ago you had to have a string behind each key.
See, that's interesting. I wonder if we'll come to a point where a hardware synthesizer comes out with an inbuilt isomorphic keyboard. That would be interesting. That would be interesting.
An instrument with a sound generator built in.
Yes. I mean, Hacken do that, don't they? With the Continuum, they have their own sound engine built inside.
Lippelt Hawken is the one who started it all.
Is that how you pronounce it? I'm terrible at pronunciations.
Oh, it's okay. People pronounce it either way. But Lippelt Hawken is a good friend of mine, and he came out with the Continuum in 1999. And for those that don't know the continuum, it's similar to Linnstrument. It's just one long row of pitches that you can play polyphonically, and you can slide from one to the other.
Mm.
His idea is to have all the notes in one line, and the only thing that's different about this really is I'm saying it's better if you can overlap those like the strings of a musical instrument. But in the continuum, the semitones are equally spaced. It's
Mm.
the same sort of idea.
I suppose there's something about ergonomics, because the way that your hands fall, I suppose, lends itself more to an extended key than it does an individual square. But all these things are learnable, aren't they, ultimately?
Well, the reason Lippold chose his layout of the continuum of having all the notes in one line is the y-axis, the forward-backward response, is much longer. So on Linnstrument, you sacrifice that long y-axis
Mm.
range for the ability to have a more compact interface and multiple instances of each note. So like a guitar, for example, I can voice a chord 6 or 7 different ways, however I choose. But on
Mm.
continuum, there's only one instance of each pitch. So they both have merit. And in the same way that the orchestra has evolved over centuries to contain different instruments for different sounds, I think the new orchestra will be different human interfaces to electronic sound. And some will be better for certain things, some will be better for other things.
Yes.
I think that I'm sure piano keyboard players will still be there for many years to come. And so all these new instruments are focusing more on not so much how can I make a better sound with a piano keyboard, but how can I make a better human interface to the sound? How can I allow the player's skills to be captured better for the performance of music?
Mm. I mean, there's one coming soon, I think, called the Osmosis from Expressive E and
Yes. I
Harken, I
know those
believe, as
guys too.
well.
Actually, we all know each other. We're
Yeah,
good
I'm
friends.
sure.
We're
Yes.
sort of on a quest to rid the world of on-off switches.
But that again is another take on the piano keyboard. But it seems as though an enormous amount of engineering has gone into attempting to capture a performance in the keyboard paradigm.
The
Whereas,
piano keyboard paradigm, yeah.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that
indeed.
is correct. And it's for good reason. People have spent many, many years
Mm.
developing musical skill in that particular arrangement of notes. It'll be around for a long time. And the Expressive E is a wonderful device.
Mm.
And not
Yeah,
only that, it has the sound generator of the Hoffman
yes.
Continuum built into it, which is a wonderful instrument. I actually have a Continue Mini myself. I
Ah.
spoke at the ContinueCon conference a couple of years ago. Wonderful group of people.
I was going to ask you a little bit about MIDI 2.0, because your instrument, the Linnstrument, is all part of the MPE, whatever we're calling it now. MIDI polyphonic expression, I think, is perhaps the most accurate term. And that has been captured now in the MIDI 2.0 idea. Have you had any input at all into the way that's developed?
No, actually, I'm not even a member of the, let's see, it was called the MMA, then it was called the IMA, and now it's just called, I think, the MIDI Association.
Yes.
Because I don't use system exclusive. And, they ask manufacturers to pay a certain price per year for a system exclusive ID, but I don't use it, so I haven't done that. But everyone would tell me what was going on, but I had no input in it. Now, the thing is who knows what will happen? Right now, MIDI 2.0 appears to be a solution looking for a problem because there's nothing you can't do with MIDI 1.0. But I will say this, a lot of very smart people created it, and it's a very elegant interface, and it reflects how protocol should be, because
Mm.
instead of having 7-bit values, it has 32-bit floating point values. And that's better. It's just that who knows whether it will become adopted because this is an industry of many people making software at home at night when they have a different job in the day. And there's only so much time and money they have. And so everyone's kind of playing wait and see. Right
Mm.
now, Linnstrument is doing fine with MIDI 1.0 and MPE, and that seems to be the standard that's happening now for expressive control. But who knows, if people ask for MIDI 2.0, I could put it in Linnstrument, but no one's asked for it yet. It
Hmm.
seems to be just sort of floating around in the background so far. But these things tend to take a lot of time, and standards have a lot of weight. So it's hard to displace MIDI 1.0.
Yeah. I mean, do you think the resolution would be worth it, or do you find on your instrument that you're not noticing the 128 values, you know, that kind of thing?
Well, first of all, Linnstrument will do full fort. Are you still there, Robin?
Yes,
Oh,
I'm
there
still
you are
here.
in the corner.
I'm just in a little corner now.
Okay.
Oh, there I am. Ah!
Yeah, you got smaller. No, Linnstrument, first of all, can do full 14-bit resolution on all 3 axes if you want, but no synthesizers support it. So most people just use for pressure 7 bits, and for y-axis 7 bits, but for x-axis, which controls pitch, we use the pitch bend messages, which are
Yes.
14-bit, which is high resolution anyway.
Oh, it's really interesting. I mean, because I think part of my thinking on it, I think, is that a lot of what MIDI 2.0 is attempting to do, we kind of feel is already there, particularly in software, because software already throws up the presets and the mapping often, and all of the sort of things like profiles and property exchange. That kind of happens when you're using purely virtual instruments. It's only really becoming more important, perhaps, as we're spilling out into hardware all over the place again. So it's interesting, but as you say, yeah, it's interesting to think of it as not quite sure what problem it is they're trying to solve. They're trying to make something better, and you can feel that and appreciate that. But most of us just then get on with what we're doing and don't really feel any deficit in what we're currently using.
You know, someone just wrote in the chat that they still can't hear my voice. Let me just check something here. Hang on a second. Maybe there's something in my Mac that got screwed up by the new update. Let's see, an input. Hello, testing. Oh, you know what? It turned the volume down. How's this?
Oh my goodness me!
Thank you, Apple. That's what happens apparently when you switch to Mac OS Big Sur.
Oh, well, they're looking after your delicate ears. That's what it is.
Okay. Sorry, everybody.
That's all right. We've only got about 5 minutes left, I think. But that's
they're
all
5
right.
louder minutes.
Yes, 5 louder minutes. So where from now then? So we have the Linnstrument. You've had that for about 5 years. You've got 2 versions,
Yes.
which are purely size related.
Yes.
Do you have anything on the burner at the moment? Anything cooking away in that?
Oh yeah, I have a drum machine I'm working on, but I tend to take forever on these things. I've announced it already. And it's basically a sample-based drum machine that will have the 3-dimensional control of Linnstrument, but with a sample-based system and also a very real-time operating system, very similar to Tempest, the drum machine I made with Dave Smith. So,
yes. There had been
yeah.
rumors of a Tempest 2, actually. That had been something which has been knocking around, I think, for ages. So it's just becoming an urban myth that there'll be a Tempest 2 at some point.
I don't think there will be. I think Dave is quite happy just making his keyboard synthesizers. That's what his main interest is. And, he spent a whole lot more money on Tempest than he did on any of his other products. And so I don't think he wants to go down that rabbit hole any further.
Fair enough.
But anyway, it's there's a whole lot you can do with drums with expressive control, and if you'd like, I could show you one thing very quickly.
Do it, yeah, do it.
Okay, so let me just get this sound up here to filter, and that, and this should be on now. So I don't know if you can see this, but I've got 200 pads here, but I'm only going to use 3 of them. And this one here is a hi-hat. And you know the feature I invented back in 1984 called note repeat or roll, where you vary pressure on a pad. Well, now I'm going to vary pressure, but I'm also going to vary the pitch. And if I slide forward, I have a pressure-controlled filter. And on the blower row, which is in yellow, I can change the speed. Then I can put in a beat.
Brilliant. You see what's interesting about that is that is in many places and many drum machine sequences, we're using multiple lanes of automation to do exactly that. You know, pass after pass. Okay, I've got to apply this. I've got to add ratchets in. I've then got to mark in accents. I'm then going to record an automation of something or other. And you were putting all that off with just a couple of fingers.
Well, that's the whole point. It's a better human interface, so you can develop skills on it. And then two people who would play this drum machine I'm making, or who buy Linnstrument now, they have exactly the same sounds, exactly the same human interface, but they have different personal performance styles. In the same way that my heroes, Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix, played a Fender Stratocaster with a Marshall amplifier, exactly the same gear, but they sounded completely different. And so it's those gestures. It's, you know, someone is identified by the slowness of their vibrato or the fastness of their vibrato or how they do bends or the particular gestures they use. And that's the sort of stuff that I'm trying to put into music is the things that are beyond on-off switches.
So are you hopeful for the future of expressive electronic music?
Yes, I think it's the next revolution. And I think that is borne out by the fact that there are so many other companies doing the same thing, joining this same movement. You know, in addition to Rolly and the Hawking Continuum, there's also Randy Jones, a brilliant guy. His Madrona Labs sound plane, the GeoShred app by the Stanford guys is wildly popular, and it uses the same interface, but another expressive interface. You're able to control those multiple dimensions in real time. And then there are others too. Keith McMillan has a keyboard that has expressive control. The Expressive V you talked about. So I think what's happening is it's a revolution in the making. And people are gradually saying, oh, on-off switches are a little bit boring. But the good news is that for some young, talented musician, there has never been so little supply and so much demand for someone who has instrumental skills. Because there's no more solos in popular music, no instrumental solos in popular music, and everything else is background for something else. So I think the time is now for someone to make a breakthrough, some new star to use one of these instruments and become the next Jimi Hendrix, the next Miles Davis, the next Coleman Hawkins. And but in today's music, as opposed to yesterday's music.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Perhaps the one area which we still haven't conquered yet is the ability to edit this information. I mean, most DAWs now have adopted MPE editing of some kind, but it's not great yet. It's there, but it's not there. I don't think the workflow has quite been found. But maybe the flip side of that is that those sorts of things shouldn't be required, because Hendrix wouldn't be editing his solos necessarily. Would he?
Well, it's funny. I sometimes in lectures, people don't quite understand what this expressive control is. And I say, let's take an example. Let's say I'm speaking to Jimi Hendrix just before a concert, and I say to him, oh, Mr. Hendrix, I have a new instrument you should play. It's like a guitar. You can think of the notes, but you're not allowed to wiggle your finger vibrato. You're not allowed to bend the strings. Instead, we have a sideways knob that you can use to bend the pitch, and another one to create a mathematically perfect vibrato. You use your right hand. Once you finger the note, hold it in place and turn this knob, then move this knob sideways. It's ridiculous. Everyone out there is playing music with devices that were intended for secretaries to enter computer data. Switches, knobs, and sliders. We're all playing music with secretarial data entry devices, and it's really silly.
He would have set it on fire, I should think. Sort of
before
playing it.
It would have melted. It says we have a question from the audience.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. From Sandro Gracia. Roger, You look really wise to me. Well, thank you very much. Writing software, when it happens a bug or any programming issue to occur, what do you suggest for a good sleep? Lots of vino. I don't know. I think that
No, that's good for
it's a
any
very
occasion.
kind question.
Okay, there we are. Roger, like you have already seen, Sandro just asked you, what do you suggest for a good sleep if you are incoming with issues when occurs any bug?
Well, yes, and as I said, lots of vino. And in fact, I noticed there's a message now from audio modeling that says Italian wine. And I'm sure you people who are listening now know about audio modeling's instruments. They are my favorite software instruments in the world. And they make instruments, they are just perfectionists, and they make instruments for all the acoustic instruments. And I played them earlier. But do you know about the audio modeling instruments, the SWAM instruments? Well, if you don't, that was the cello I was playing earlier.
Right.
But they're absolutely beautiful. Here we go then.
I guess they are. Wow.
I just can't believe it. It's so good. Those guys are just magicians.
This is very fine stuff. Okay, Roger and Robin, I would like to thank you for this interview because it was very interesting. We've heard a lot of interesting things from you. And what else can I say? We will be glad to receive you in the next SOUNDMIT, maybe in person if possible. Since this year was very, very difficult to do such an event in this digital way, but this is something that we really liked. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome, and it's my pleasure. And thank you for inviting me. And so I guess that's it. I'll say goodbye.
Yeah, me too.
Ciao.
Thank you, Roger.
Bye.
Take care. Good talking to you.
Bye now.
Ciao.
Let's see. Here we go.